So this special interview is for SiriusXM listeners and readers of the GayGuideNetwork.com. George Michael, icon, queer icon, legend, controversial, prolific singer, songwriter, one of our greatest voices, I think. Star. He died early and tragically. These are some of the things that come to my mind when I think of the late artists. But who was George Michael really? That is the question that gets answered now in the new documentary, George Michael, Portrait of an Artist, now available on Amazon Prime, Apple iTunes, and Google Play. His longtime lover, Kenny Goss, appears in it. So do luminaries like Stevie Wonder, Rufus Wainwright, and many others, taking a definitive look at the illustrious life filled with many ups and downs of the Grammy winner. This is the doing of Simone Napier-Bell, George Michael's music manager. Simon joins us now to help answer the question, who was George Michael? And I want to say to you, first of all, Simon, what an elegant love letter this documentary is to George.
I sort of was what it was meant to be, although I never expressed that love to him particularly. You know, a manager's relationship is not, it's not even a friend relationship, it's a professional relationship. It's better if it's not a friend relationship because it gets between professional things you have to do. And so, although we always got on incredibly well, it wasn't quite like being a friend. And in a way, I regret that, but you can't be the manager and the friend. You have to do one or the other.
Right.
And when I stopped managing him, I then continued to follow his career as you would a great friend or a brother or a relation, a relative, and was fascinated by it as he went through his life afterwards. And when you're a manager and you spend 45, 50 years of your life managing artists, there are a lot of moments when you think, have I wasted my life? Maybe I could have been a rocket scientist or a politician or whatever. It's something as wonderful as as you doing all those marvelous things. And you think, why am I wasting my time with all these silly young kids who want to be stars? And then one comes along and it justifies everything.
Right.
I took George. He was aspirational, young, quite naive. Not very naive. He was never very naive, but naive enough that I felt I could help him out, and took him from there to being a writer, an established writer. You
started in the Wham days, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
at the very beginning. Right.
Yep.
How do you describe? I used a bunch of things that came to my head to describe George. How do you describe him? What terms and adjectives would you use?
It's so complex. He was very typically an artist. If you're used to managing artists, they all suffer something in their childhood which makes them look into themselves. It's usually a lack of love. It may not be a lack of love. They may think they're getting a lack of love. Sometimes it's as simple as that. Sometimes the death of a sibling or a parent, even the death of a pet, but something which really isolates them a bit from all the people around them. And they tend to go off to their room, if they're lucky enough to have one, and sit and fantasize about what they'll become. And then they turn themselves into something a bit different from what they were. And sometimes they develop a stage act, which is so different that it's like two different people. And they spend a lot of their lives trying to turn their real selves into what the stage act is.
Right,
They perceive that is nearer the person they want to be than who they really are. Sometimes it's utterly shocked, so they find they can't bring those two things together. George never quite got them together, but he was the most aware person I ever met. He was
so what parts did he get together? What parts did he not get together, do you think?
Well, he'll say towards the end of his life, he says, I hate fame and, I hate being in the limelight. Of course he didn't. I mean, it's easy enough to stop that if you want to stop it. He loved it, but he hated himself. Well, it's like being a drug addict, isn't it? I hate heroin, but I rush off and take it, or even drink alcohol. He didn't like that he sort of needed that. And although he probably didn't need it anymore, because he was looking for a love he probably didn't get from his father, or felt he didn't get. He probably didn't need to look for it anymore, but it's innately in him, in his character. He just had to keep on looking for it.
I wanted to linger on that a little bit. It's a question I have for a little later on, but since you brought it up, he didn't feel like he was the son that his father wanted, and that really resonated to me when it's talked about in your documentary, because I think it resonates with a lot of gay men. I don't know whether you yourself feel that. I certainly felt that. Talk to us about the impact on George Michael that having that feeling that he was not good enough for his father, not the son his father wanted, had on him.
It was a Greek family, and his father came from a traditional Greek patriarchal society. He probably wasn't anti-gay. He ran a restaurant. He probably had gay waiters and respected and liked what they did. But that wasn't what he wanted for a son. He wanted a person like him, someone who's going to take over the business and be very manly and breed lots of children. And George felt it. I mean, George, long before George knew what being gay was, when you're 6 or 7, you begin to feel that you're not quite giving your father what he expected.
Right.
I mean, there are signs you behave. Gays sort of know
I do.
the difficult gay from 6 or 7. And so he felt that, and perhaps feeling it made it worse, because it's possible that really his father, later on he said, his father admitted, I behaved badly, if you think of what a modern father is meant to, how his modern father is meant to behave. But if you think how we were brought up as Greeks to behave, that's the correct way to behave. And most artists have much the same. I would say 90% of all artists, they arrive being creative from that problem with their father. And then when they get to 35 or 40, they realize that problem with their father is what made them what they are, made them creative. And not many would like to give up that creativity. So they usually make amends and get to like their father and say, you old bastard, you wrecked my life, but look, I've turned it round. And then they usually have to end up keeping their father too. So
you basically described me.
I usually charge for analysis. So.
This is something I turned into like some sort of psychoanalysis session. But I did relate so much to that. And the other part of the movie that struck me about George Michael is that he was so bold in his sexuality early. With he was derided in an interview by one person who was saying that his lyrics, sex is natural, sex is fun, sex is best when it's one-on-one, were vile, I think was the word used by the interviewer.
Trite was the word. He was
trite.
He was really saying, like a nursery rhyme, this is just rubbish. It was an extraordinary interview, that, because he said to George out of the blue, and this was the beginning of the Faith Tour, when George had definitely decided, I can't come out yet. I've created an image which requires me for a couple of years to be this big straight macho guy.
Yeah.
And he just came straight out, beginning to say, are you gay? And George said, no.
No.
And I could see in George's eyes, oh, flip, I should have said yes. This would have been an incredible moment to say yes. But once he said no, and then he tried to justify it. Say, oh, it's none of your business if I sleep with a girl or a dog or a boy.
Yeah.
But you could see he missed a moment, and later on, I'm sure he regretted it. I should.
You can see that. You can see that. But I was so struck because he was such a young man, and the interviewer was being such a see you next Tuesday to him. And he really, despite the fact that he missed his little moment, maybe to say that he was gay, well, that would have been a big moment, but he missed that opportunity. But he really defended himself beautifully. And we see that later on in his life when he's caught with his pants down in the washroom in LA, and he turns the whole business around on everybody by, again, being so bold about his sexuality and saying there's nothing wrong with what I did through his music.
He loved doing that. When I was managing him, he said to me one day, I've never done anything I could regret. Now, he was quite a control freak and had his life very carefully laid out. He planned which songs Wham would release, in what order, how he was going to build his career. And I thought, gosh, what a control freak, that he runs his whole life on the basis that he never do something he might regret. Later, when I watched his life pass by, I realized that what he meant is I'll never do anything which I can't turn around and say, you see, it was good that I did it. I don't regret it. And that's what he did time and time again. And you're right, when he was caught in the toilet, it was almost as if you might almost look at it and think he planned it. I've got an idea for a video. What justification for making the video? I know, I'll go off to the toilet and get caught. It almost looks like that. It's so almost pre-planned.
It's so genius, and as I said before, brave. And then we find out after he's dead, we found this out, but we find out even more in depth in your documentary that he was generous to the extreme as a
Unbelievable.
philanthropist. Tell us a bit more about that. He avoided making headlines for his kindness, but he was paying for women's fertility treatments, tipping waitresses thousands of dollars of money.
Well, he watched television a lot. Most of his knowledge and awareness of what went on life came from television. He's an obsessive television watcher. And he would sit and watch television, and someone would, the talk show would come on, and there'd be someone who needs a new set of teeth or an operation, or he said HIV, that had HIV and needed some treatment or a fertility treatment. And he would just pick up the phone, get through the radio station or television station and say, I'll pay for it. But he didn't want his name connected with it. I mean, it would have been very cheesy to have your name connected all the time, because he did it all the time. But I think he had he was a very moral person, and you saw all this money coming in, and he had 80, 90, $100 million. And I think he felt a lot of guilt about acquiring this money. And it's not easy to deal with being well off like that, because you're a fool to throw it away. Then you have no power. And you're also, it's not very wise to keep it for no good reason. So he did try to distribute as much as he could. And almost anybody he came across who needed something, he would say, yes, let me give it to you.
Is it true that he gave songwriting credit for Careless Whisper to Andrew Ridgely to make sure that he'd always be provided for? That was one of the generosities that came to light. I don't know whether that was true or not, though.
What I don't know, and I know Andrew very well too, and I still see him often, is to what degree Andrew did contribute to the song, because I suspect he did. It's very difficult to know. I mean, I've written hit songs, and two people might sit in a room, and one would seem to be doing all the writing, but if the other person wasn't sitting there saying, oh, that bit's crap, that bit's good, you wouldn't get a hit song. I suspect Andrew was a reasonable part, maybe 20% of writing that song. And George presented it as if they were 50-50, which is very kind of him. But on the other hand, Wake Me Up Before You Go Go, which wouldn't exist without Andrew, because Andrew, they were going out the next day, and Andrew got home late, so he'd written a note for George and said, Wake Me Up Before You Go Go. And George thought, hit record. He didn't give Andrew credit for that.
Oh, is that so?
I thought that was strange.
Oh, I would have thought he would have. He famously took on his record label. And I wonder, were you around for that? Were you his manager then?
That was me, really. I mean, I took on his record label on his behalf. That was the very first meeting I had with him. I had a partner, another manager. The very first meeting we had with him, he said, you have to get us out of our record deal. And I said, a new group who just had their first hit, starting the industry, the stupidest, worst thing you could do was to go to war with your record company. Wait.
Right.
And he said, no, I want to get out the record deal. Well, we looked at the record deal. It was a terrible record deal. It was the ultimate immorality that just business lives in. CBS had financed a very small record label, and the contract which signed Wham to that small record label was provided to that record label by CBS. They said, here's a contract, get them to sign this. So actually it was CBS who'd screwed the group. Right. And the record label were the people they were signed to. And for example, the record label focused at those days on selling 12-inch dance records. And in the contract, they didn't get royalties on 12-inch dance records. So having sold 4 million selling records, they hadn't got 1 penny of royalties. When they sued, or we sued that company called Innovision, CBS didn't back that company by helping them with their legal costs. They just left them to it. And the company didn't have any money. So obviously, the company couldn't afford to fight it legally. And so then CBS stepped in and said, oh, well, we'll sign them direct. It was typical corporate manipulation.
What about when he took on Sony?
That was a mistake. And he admitted in later life it was a mistake.
Were you there for that?
No, I wasn't.
No.
I watched it and I talked to him and I advised him.
Yeah.
There were two things. One is Anselmo had died, and Anselmo was his boyfriend, and he was the first real boyfriend he ever had. And your first boyfriend is a pretty big love of your life, as you know. It's the first time he felt I could say I'm in love and be public about it. And his boyfriend had died. And when people die, for some reason, it makes us incredibly angry. I'm sure you've had someone die in your life, and almost the first feeling is one of anger. it's misplaced. You don't know where the anger should go, but you feel angry. And so he was in a very angry mood, and he heard that the head of his record label in America had referred to him as a limey faggot. And he went mad. He said, "Get me out of there. I'm going to be with them for another 8 albums, another 10 years. How can I exist for the man who calls me that?" So he went to his lawyers, and they said, as lawyers do, "Well, you can't fight the case on that basis. We'll have to find something wrong with the contract, and we'll find little thing." But there was nothing wrong with the contract. That he'd signed it when he was 18. He changed it and made it better. When he was 20, he changed it a second time, each time amending it and saying, "Yeah, I'm happy now." And I called him and I said, "Really, you should fight this case on the basis that you have a right not to have a head of a company who calls you a limey faggot." But of course, the lawyers,
Right.
they won't do that. And so he did the case. He lost, but he exposed an awful lot about what went on in the industry. Primarily, that the fact that when the artist pays for the record they make, they pay all the costs, and then when they sell enough to repay those costs to the record company, they don't own the record. The record company continues to own it. And that is really the wrongest thing about the music industry.
It feels so archaic.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of reasons for it. I've written a book on the history of the music business, and it explains exactly how that happened. And in a way, it's justified if you see the explanation, but it's not justified that it continues.
No, and it's not keeping up with the times. The documentary is called George Michael, Portrait of an Artist, and you're the director of it. It's available on iTunes, on Google Play, and on Amazon Prime. What did you learn about George Michael in making this movie that you didn't know about him before?
I'm not sure what I learned, but I saw more in depth. It was extraordinary the way he both defended being able to go cruising, and gays aren't like straight people and they don't have to live a normal straight life, and at the very same time demonstrated a very normal looking life, almost like a straight life. You would see him with Kenny Goss, who was his boyfriend for 14 years.
Yes.
You see them, maybe George was doing an interview and Kenny was in the back of the room, and then Kenny had to leave. He said, "I'm going now." And George said, "All right, darling, see you later." You don't hear gays say that. Gays, we've been brought up to avoid saying that. It's strange to behave so normally and say those very normal words which straight couples would say in public in front of other people. He did that a lot, and it was really useful to gay people to see that you could be gay, manly, just you wouldn't even be noticed as being gay if you walked down the street, but you talk to each other in that very nice, sentimental, domestic way. That he did absolutely brilliantly. But then he countered that by also cruising. So he was selling two sides of gay life, and he was so articulate. When he went on television, he'd defend both things very articulately.
Very brave of him and very ahead of his time. When I was listening to his defense on a talk show, watching a documentary, he verbalized it in a way that we would say now, but back then, we didn't have as much acceptance. Things hadn't grown to the degree they have now. So he was really on the raw and ragged edge by doing that, I think. And it was very brave of him, I maintain. Was he ever happy, truly happy?
You could ask that of most people, couldn't you? Happiness isn't a 24-hour thing, isn't it? I mean, if I tried to think back to the happiest day I ever had, I'm sure during that day I was quite unhappy as well. He was able to be happy and often was happy, but I don't think he was discontent. But then that's all artists are discontent. That's why they create. They have an element inside them of discontent which drives them forward. And yes, you could be happy with this person doing this, and then 5 minutes later you're not. I've seen him happy. I mean, wonderfully happy, fantastic to be with. But I don't think he was ever happy for a continuous 24 hours. But have you been? I'm not sure I have.
I've been. To be honest with you,
hours,
sure.
24 hours, non-stop.
Yes.
Oh,
I really have. Sorry.
I might have.
You have too.
I'm sure I have, and I'm sure he.
I think everybody has.
I think when he met Anselmo, but he was always on the edge of going into a different mood. That was him.
I ask you, yeah, because there's an overriding. If you think about him, the lawsuits, being caught with his pants down, and there's a lot of strife. His partner dying on him, his relationships unfolding and terminating. There's a lot, and then of course the tragic way he died at such a young age. There's a lot of energy about him that is. Negative and strife filled, and that's why I asked, was he actually ever happy? Because we saw so much more of the controversy and the challenges he had, than we did of the happiness, because happiness is kind of boring to watch, I suppose, and to report on.
Well, I think he was always happy on stage. I mean,
uh,
someone who responds so well to an audience and has such confidence, he would be quite shy if he walked into a room and there were 3 or 4 people there he didn't know. But if he walked out on stage and there was 100,000 people there, he didn't know, but he would know them because they knew him. He had complete confidence. I mean, if you wanted to see George at his most relaxed, it was in front of 100,000 people, and his most tense in front of 3 or 4 people. So I guess he was always happy on stage. Even singing an unhappy song, he was happy, because
happy.
as a performer, you feel that you have the technique and you hold in the audience and you're letting them hear something. Sometimes you can be quite happy being unhappy, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
He could perform a sad song, and I'm sure he was happy doing it.
I get that. I understand that. What do you know about his final days that you could tell us about?
Not much. Look, his voice had gone. But when he got pneumonia on that last tour, his voice got much less good. And I think he's someone, he loved doing other people's songs, both on the Cover to Cover tour he did just after, it's when he met Anselmo. And there's a fantastic, you'll find it on YouTube, you'll find a Rock in Rio concert, which he did. I think it's the best concert he ever did. He just had a quarrel with the record company and pretty much said to them, oh, the hell with the music industry, I hate you all. And that has sort of freed him. He hadn't got out of contract, but he felt freed by singing. Then he just met Anselmo, and he obviously thought, oh, I've told the record company what I think, let's just come out, let's do the whole thing now. He didn't come out to the public, but he came out to his friends, his relatives. And he was definitely happy and having a great time then. But he sang half the songs in that show were other people's songs. He loved singing great songs. And he didn't do that again till the 25 Live tour. And then again, he sang, sorry, I got that wrong. He didn't do that again till the Symphonica tour. And then again, he sang mainly other people's songs, and he loved doing it. And, he could take somebody's song like the Rufus Wainwright song, Going to a Town, and you'd think it was his song. You couldn't believe someone else had written it. It was so completely his life song. You think of George, all that was happening in George's life. You think, yes, that he tells that in the song. And it wasn't his song. He loved doing that. But singers and songwriters who, as they get older, go on to do that. Somebody like Charles Aznavour or Tony Bennett. They are people who keep their voices impeccably. You need that voice, especially if you're singing other people's songs. You can bend your own song to your reduced voice ability, but you can't do that with somebody else's song. You've got to give it all. And I think as he felt his voice was going, he was very disappointed. And I think his songwriting was fading. He felt it would come back. But, ups and downs, this wasn't a happy period. And he definitely got into more drugs than he would have liked, even though he was voluntarily doing it. People take drugs and they know what they're doing. That doesn't mean they really like what they're doing.
Right.
And so he was on a downward spiral, definitely.
What would you say to him if you could still say something to him now?
Oh my goodness. I'd probably tell him something he did wrong when I was managing him. See, I always meant to tell you, but I didn't. No, you really shouldn't have done that. I don't know. The thing about George, he was very opinionated, very stubborn, incredibly articulate. And he once said to me, if I'm telling you something and you don't agree with me, it's because you're not listening. So there's not a lot you could tell him later, is there?
No, I guess you couldn't. I want to thank you for your time. We're out of it, Simon.
Okay.
A wonderful, like I called it, an elegant love letter to George Michael. It's called George Michael Portrait of an Artist, and it's available on iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon Prime. So run, don't walk to see that. I think it's a
And
lovely piece.
if I'd thought of that title, that's what we would have called the film.
What?
What a pity! What a pity! A love letter to George Michael.
Oh, you still change it. It's all yours. I'll give that to
Bit
you.
late now.
Simon, thanks so much
Thank
for your
you.
time and your greatest
Thank you.
success with your documentary. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.